In this video, I'm going to go through sketching quadratic graphs. Sketching graphs is not the same as plotting the graph. When you plot the graph, you're given a table to find the coordinates, and you plot each point that you're given. But a sketch is, you need to know what the graph looks like, and you need to then label the x, where the graph cuts the x-axis, the y-axis, and the coordinate of the turning point. So the first thing I want to look at with the two graphs here is the shape of the quadratic graph. What determines the shape is the coefficient of x squared. It's the number attached to multiplied by x squared. Here the coefficient is 1x squared. It's a positive coefficient, so this graph is a U shape. The next graph, the coefficient is -1. A negative coefficient means that the graph looks like this. So the first thing you need to do is to establish if it's a positive quadratic or negative quadratic. And then the next thing to determine is where the graph cuts the y-axis, which is the y-intercept. Now, for any graph, the y-intercept is the constant number, the number that doesn't have an x attached to it. So for part B, this graph is going to cut the y-axis at y equals 2. So that's the y-intercept. The actual coordinate is 0, 2. It's always 0, because if you have a grid with x and y, the graph is going to cut there. On the y-axis, x is 0. So it's the coordinate of the y-intercept is always 0, and then the value for y. And for part B, for this one, the y-intercept is -6, so the coordinate is 0, -6. So these two things, the shape of the graph and the y-intercept, are relatively straightforward. The next thing you need to find is the X intercept. It's where the graph cuts the x-axis. Now you find that by factorizing. Remember, this is a 3-term quadratic, so you factorize into double brackets. You could also use the quadratic formula, or you can complete the square. So all of these allow you to find the x-intercepts. So I'm going to solve this equation, x squared plus 3x plus 2 equals to 0, because I'm trying to find when y equals to 0. So the graph will cut the x-axis when, so these are x-intercepts and they are on the x-axis, so the value for y is 0. So when I factorize, I want x times x to make the x squared. I need to find the numbers that multiply to make 2. There's only 2 and 1. I've got pluses, so it is a plus and a plus. That means that it's x equals -2 and x equals -1. Remember, each of those brackets could equal to 0. So for that bracket to equal to 0, x has to equal -1. Or if that bracket equals 0, then x has to equal -2. So if I'm going to write them as coordinates, I'm going to put the following: -2, 0, -1, 0. I'm going to do the same here. Because of the negative coefficient, the easiest thing might actually be the quadratic formula, but I'm going to factorize. So this is negative x plus 6, and it's going to be an x minus 1. So solving, this means either negative x plus 6 equals to 0, or x minus 1 equals 0. So this is negative x equals negative 6, therefore x equals 6, or this is x equals 2, 1. So the x-intercepts here are 6, 0, and 1, 0. So what you need to know is that to find x-intercepts, you need to factorize or use the quadratic formula or complete the square, but you need to solve the equation when y equals to 0. The last thing you need to be able to find is the coordinate of the turning point. So the turning point is that bit there. Now, the turning point to any quadratic graph is actually, splits the graph into two. So at least the x coordinate is found by finding the midpoint between the two x-intercepts. So the x coordinate of the turning point is the symmetry line that cuts the graph into two equal parts. And to find that midpoint is just like finding the median between two numbers. You're going to add the two numbers and divide by 2. But the first thing we need to do is actually find the x-intercepts. So to find the x-intercepts, I need to solve this equation equal to 0, because I'm trying to find x. So x times x gives me x squared, and I want 4 and 2. 4 times 2 gives me 8, and I want a negative 8 but a positive 2x. So plus 4 take away 2 gives us a positive 2x, and the plus 4 times negative 2 gives the negative 8. So solving, this gives me x equals minus 4, and this gives me x equals 2. And of course, this was clear from the diagram. So the x coordinate of the turning point is the midpoint. So it's negative 4 plus 2 all divided by 2. So negative 4 plus 2 is negative 2, divided by 2 is negative 1. And this looks about right, that this is negative 1. But I also need to find the coordinate on the graph. So it's that green point that I want. So I need to find the y coordinate. If I have x, because that's the value of x, and I want to find y, and y is on the actual graph, well, here is the equation of the graph that gives me the value for y when I know the value for x. So I'm going to substitute that into the equation of the graph. Negative 1 squared. Remember, you put the power outside the bracket, and every x turns into a bracket, and you simply substitute the number in the bracket. You can type it like this. You can actually get your calculator and put negative 1 squared plus 2 brackets negative 1 minus 8 equals, and it gives you minus 9. And again, that looks about right. It's just above minus 10 here on the diagram, so it's negative 9. So the coordinate of the turning point is minus 1, minus 9. So these are all the things that you need to do to be able to sketch quadratics, and we're going to see a few examples. So solve the equation x squared minus x minus 72 equals 0. So the first thing you need to do is find the factors of 72, and we need to subtract to make 1. I hope you spot that actually an 8 and a 9 have a difference of 1, and they multiply to make 72. So if I start factorizing, x times x is x squared, 9 times 8 is 72. One of them is going to be a negative. I want a negative 1x. So if I do minus 1 plus 8, that gives me negative 1x, and negative 9 times a positive 8 is a negative 72. So that gives us x equals 9 and x equals negative 8 for our x intercepts. So let's start to look at sketching the graph. What's the shape of the graph? That's always the first thing I ask myself. The shape, well, it's a positive quadratic because x squared is positive. So that means it's going to be a U shape. The x intercepts are 9, 0 and negative 8, 0. The y-intercept is that number on its own without an x. So it's negative 72. Or if I put it as a coordinate, I'll put 0 minus 72. And then finally, I want the turning point. And for the turning point, I need to find the midpoint between those two. So I add them up, 9 plus minus 8 divided by 2. 9 plus minus 8 is 1. And 1 divided by 2 is 0.5. So the x-coordinate is 0.5. And I find the y-coordinate by substituting 0.5 into the equation. So it's 0.5 squared minus 0.5 minus 72. And again, you would get your calculator and you put that in. 0.5 squared. Remember, the power goes outside the bracket. 0.5 and minus 72. And it gives you minus 72.25. So minus 72.25. So the turning point is 0.5 and minus 72.25. It's a sketch. Okay, you are sketching the graph. It's not going to be to scale, you're not plotting. So you would get your you would get a ruler and you would do a nice grid. Let's put this here. Let's move that there and put here we are. There we are. So we've got x and y. Always label your axes. And you have got 9 and minus 8. Okay, so that's let's do it a little bit differently. There we go. So let's label. That's minus 8. That's 9. That here is the y-intercept minus 72, and the turning point, a bit lower, it's 0.5 minus 72.25. So that is a sketch of your quadratic. Next one. Solve x squared minus 4x equals 0. Now this is not a 3-term quadratic. It doesn't have that last number on its own. This means it's not going to be factorized in a double bracket. It's going to be factorized in a single bracket because it doesn't have that number on its own. It only has x squared and an x term. These are actually much easier because you look for the common factor, and the common factor is x. So x is factorized on the outside. You open a bracket and you're left with an x. X times x gives you x squared, and then minus 4. Now to solve, it means either that part on the outside equals x, so either, equals 0, either x equals 0, or x minus 4 equals to 0, which means that x equals to positive 4. So you've got your x intercepts here. So let's have a look at the shape of the quadratic. Again, x squared is positive. So the shape of the graph is a U shape. The x intercepts, it's x equals 0. So that means it's 0, 0 or 4, 0. The y-intercept, well, there is no number on its own. So literally, the y-intercept is going to be at 0, 0 as well, because there is no number on its own, so it is 0 or 0, 0. And the turning points, well, the first thing we're going to do is find the x coordinate of the turning point. So that's the midpoint. So we add the two x intercepts together and we divide by 2. 4 divided by 2 gives us 2. And then we substitute this into the equation of the graph. So that's 2 squared minus 4 times 2. 2 squared is 4. Minus 8 is minus 4. So the turning point has a coordinate of 2, negative 4. So let's sketch that. I'm going to get the ruler again, make this nice and neat. Always label your x and y axes. It's going to cut through here, and was it a positive 4? Yes, it was a positive 4, so it's going to there we are. So that's 0, that's 4, and that is going to be 2, negative 4. And I'll take this. So that's our graph. This one is not a 3-term quadratic, but it's the difference between two squares. And you know that because there isn't an x term. There's a squared term and a negative squared constant as well. And they come from double brackets that are nearly identical except the signs are different. To get the 4, we square root. X squared is an x and an x. And then we square root to get to the negative 100. So it's a positive 10 and a negative 10. That means that it's either 2x plus 10 equals 0 or 2x minus 10 equals 0. So that's 2x equals negative 10, x equals negative 5, or 2x equals a positive 10, so x is a positive 5. So we've got our x-intercepts. To sketch, we need to find the shape of the graph. Again, the coefficient of x squared is positive, it's a positive 4. So it's a U-shape. The x-intercepts we know are negative 5, 0 and 5, 0. The y-intercept is the constant on its own. It's the minus 100. It's a y equals minus 100, so it's 0, negative 100. And the turning points, well, we start with the x coordinates of the turning points by finding the midpoint of these. So if I add negative 5 plus 5 and divide by 2, well, minus 5 plus 5 is 0, 0 divided by 2 is 0, so x equals 0. And if I substitute that into the equation, so to find the y coordinate, you've got 4, and every x turns into a bracket, minus 100. Well, 0 minus 100 is negative 100. These ones are also quite nice because your turning point is at the y-intercept. So the graph turns at the y-intercept. So again, I'm going to get my ruler. Nice and neat axes. Always label your axes. Got minus 5 and 5, and it's going to be minus 100. So minus 5 and 5, and that is 0 minus 100, and that is the turning pointer. If I, let's try and do it a bit better. There we are. So that's the turning point at 0 minus 100. And finally, my last example is have solved the equation 2x squared plus 6x equals 20 and sketch the graph. Now, it's really important to recognize that the first thing you need to do is to rearrange to make the equation equal to 0 before you can solve it. And then you can factorize. So I've got 2x and x for 20 factors of 20, 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 4 times 5, and one of them is going to be a negative, and one of them is going to be multiplied by 2. So the one I put here is going to be multiplied by the 2x. It's going to double, and I want to get a 6. So let's have a look. If I double that, that's an 8. Minus 5 is not gonna give me what if I double the other one times 2. 10 minus 4 is gonna give me a 6. So I think I've hit the jackpot here. 2x times 5 is going to give 10x. So, and I want it to be a positive 10. And then if I take away 4 So negative 4x is going to give me my plus 6x, which is what I want there. So now I have 2x minus 4 equals 0, or x plus 5 equals 0. This means that x is negative 5, 2x equals 4, x equals 2. I have got my x-intercepts. My y-intercept is negative 20. This is a positive quadratic, so it's a U shape. I want my turning points. So the turning points are going to be the midpoint of the x-intercept, so 2 plus negative 5, all divided by 2. 2 plus minus 5 is really 2 minus 5, which is negative 3. Negative 3 over 2 is that, negative 3 over 2, which is negative 1.5. And then I'm going to put it back into the equation, this one. So remember, it's the y that equals to 0. So y equals 2x squared plus 6x minus 20. So that's x. And y is 2 minus 1.5 squared plus 6 brackets minus 1.5 minus 20. And we get our calculator, 2 brackets minus 1.5 squared plus 6 brackets minus 1.5 minus 20. So that is minus 24.5. So minus 24.5. So that is the turning point. Minus 1.5 and minus 24.5. So I'm going to get my ruler. I'm going to draw my axes. I'm going to label my axes with x and y. And you've got a 2 and a minus 5. And the turning point is going to be around here, because it's at minus 1.5. And the turning point is a bit lower than the y-intercept as well. So let's have a look. So it is 2 and minus 5, right. So that looks like a 2. That's a minus 5. That is minus 20. And that is minus 1.5 and minus 24.5. So it has to be a bit lower. The turning point has to start in the second quadrant, because it's at minus 1.5. And so it turns in the third quadrant, minus 1.5, and it has to be lower, and then it starts going back up again because the y-intercept is at minus 20. This, if it comes up, it rarely does, but if it does come up, it tends to be a 3 or 4 mark question. And that is how to sketch quadratic graphs.